Welcome to the Happy Sensory Corner and Special Education podcast, where we ask the leaders in special education to share their insights and experiences with the audience in an effort to better understand how to support students in special education. And before we start our interview, I'd like to introduce our guests. Our first guest is Anthony Caporaso, the Director of Special Education in Bergen County Tech in New Jersey. Welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
And we're also here with Claudia Palmares, the creator of Sensory Enrichment Therapy. She's the Chief Science Officer at Mendability, where they provide a unique program called Sensory Enrichment Therapy. It's an evidence-based brain stimulation program to improve the behavior regulation and learning abilities of all students, especially those who struggle the most. She'll be doing a short training at the end of our interview. So thanks, Claudia, for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, so to start with, Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into special education?
Back in 1995, as I started out as a general education teacher, I noticed that there was just a need to really help kids at a different level. I was already understanding as a brand new teacher how to work with other teachers to learn how to differentiate instruction. And I was probably one of the first people where my assistant superintendent really was asking me, why don't you go back and get your special ed certification? So I went back for over a course of 2 years, and I did that, and I started working more with inclusive classrooms, and that was back in the early 90s. And I even noticed back then, depending on who I would have as a teacher with me, that they're looking at special ed differently and not really putting in the kind of supports that should be needed for children who have different learning styles. So as I continued doing that, I branched out into really helping with reading and writing and bringing in different formats, even bringing in, at that time, I would bring in old Apple computers, and I would use the Apple computers as part of stations to help kids work either with grammar or even math while I'm working with other small groups. So I started with that, and I moved on to become a vice principal. And really, what got me when I was at a vice principal, I had such a large school. We had over 1,200 students. I had 660 of them, and I was working with the child study team quite a bit. And I really, at that time, didn't even know about what a learning disability teacher consultant was, because I see people on child study team. I'm like, well, what do you do? And they're like, well, I'm a special ed teacher, and now I work as a person on child study team as a consultant and a test. And I said, wow, that sounds really good. Even as a vice principal, still keeping my special ed roots, I decided to go back to school again and get my learning disability teacher consultant certification. As I moved on, I became a principal, and I just noticed again that special ed just was not being considered really strongly. It was sort of always like a background. It's always, oh, those kids. And I really just wanted to push to do more for them. So I really activated my LDTC, and I became a full-time LTC on a CST team up here in Bergen County. And I did that for 9 years before I took over as director of special education. And for me, now it's really to put special ed in the forefront. So that's really where I've been and what I continue to do now.
That's great. It sounds like you've always kind of had a special place in your heart for special education and been an advocate in that area.
Absolutely. Even I get people that call me outside, families. The families will ask me to talk to other families about what can I do in my district. And I listen to them to figure out exactly what it is, and having the knowledge of how school districts work, I can help them along, and looking at IEPs for them, and I also tell them what I think might be good. Sometimes we have, even as parents of special ed kids, and you want to have you think your child needs a lot more. Sometimes you disable them further if you give them things that they don't need. And that's one of the things I preach as well, is that, just because we have 50% extended time doesn't mean everybody needs it. And not every child responds well to having extra time. And that's something that I've had to work with my child study team with. It's like, make sure when we're putting IEPs together, these things are thoughtful, they're well planned out, and it really meets the needs of the children.
Right. So what do you think is your biggest need for special education students in your district at this time?
There's a lot of needs, and you really go back to what's really happened is the pandemic has set us all back. Mm-hmm. We jumped right back into learning without really addressing, as we say, as much as the social emotional learning part, but we really haven't. We just started business as usual. Teachers got back in, and we're not really thinking. Everybody's health is on the line. I've seen parents, I've seen students, I've seen principals. One of the principals I work with, that wonderful guy, but I can see the strain and the stress on him, and it's not being addressed. It's just like, keep moving, soldier.
Right.
And that's not what it's all about. It's really about connecting. I've worked with teachers to try to get them out of the funk that came with the pandemic and trying to work with children online, and just feeling the overwhelming piece of not being able to connect, and then coming back and not really connecting again, and just saying, well, where was that passion? Where was that fire you had before the pandemic? And that's I think one of the biggest problems right now. It's really hard to reach everyone at different levels, because we also have parents that are not responding as well, because it goes to so many different layers. And I've had to come up with programs to have what we almost put the parents on a behavior contract to work with their kids, because that's something that, we have to say, yes, you're still involved in this too. You just can't go ahead and go do what you want to do. You have to be actively involved and be there with your child, because if your child doesn't see you as part of their mission, then they're not going to continue on with it either. So that's been probably our biggest struggle right now.
Right. And it sounds like you're saying too, you got to be able to help yourself before you can help the kids too.
Oh, exactly.
Right. What do you think is the last program or idea that you brought to your school district that worked really well, and why do you think it worked so well?
I've been beating the drum about phones in the classroom, technology that is misused. We give every child a Chromebook. Every child still has their phone. And what it's done, especially with children who have executive functioning problems, that they have a hard time attending as it is. But now you allow them to have a phone. They're not listening to directions. They're on there. I've been, as I go in and I observe teachers, I'm in the back of the classroom and I can see kids on different websites, some playing video games, and they're very smart about having double screens up and flicking them over. And it also causes a lot of problems in the school itself, because the students are texting each other, meet me in the bathroom, and we see a lot of different things happening, bullying, and all the other things that come along with it. I finally convinced the schools to put the phones away. We have phone lockers. And teachers, it's a united front. Put the phones in the phone lockers. Don't have a computer out unless you actually have something that you have to research. You're first studying and you're first working with the teachers. Make sure you're actively listening. And when you're in groups, you're having eye contact and you're discussing things and you're using your knowledge. You're not just pulling something randomly off the computer. And we're seeing bigger gains. We're seeing more students actually being active participants in their learning. There's less distraction, and there's also actually more cooperation, more excitement from the teachers, because the teachers don't feel like they're just handing out work. It became like the computers have become the new worksheets of the of this time period now. It's just, all right, give them something and they'll do it on the computer. It's not working. And then so you have to use technology appropriately. There's no need to have phones, because it really just distracts the kids more. And we're seeing such a reduction in problems outside. There's not kids going into the bathroom trying to smoke or getting fights. And so all of that has changed in just a short amount of time. And it's just such a simple fix. And you would be surprised to think, well, why couldn't you do this before? This is not something that costs you any money. And it's just a matter of getting everybody on board. And I said to the leadership, it starts with you. It has to start from the top, and it'll trickle down. Because if the top is not giving any orders about it, then it's not gonna happen. But I see it happening now. And I mean, I just I can be a pain in the butt that way and keep pushing my agenda, but I know it's right, and we're getting results for it.
Wow, that sounds great. So it sounds like just having that strong decision about technology, it really is creating more of a community in your school district.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for us teachers even to have our cell phones out too, so it's good for everybody to be on the same page.
Exactly.
Um, Great. So, do you have a story about an idea or program that did not work well in your
Well,
district?
I can't. I was thinking about that, and it's not that I have a particular story, but I can tell you that anytime I've seen a horror story happen in a school, no matter if it's something you're trying to put on an activity or you're trying to do something after school, I find it always comes down to the problem of poor preparation, lack of communication, lack of awareness of understanding the underlying issues in a building and knowing the climate. Those are always the recipe for disaster, no matter what you do. Because when I hear people say, "Oh, that didn't go well," then I'll talk to some of the teachers. That's like, I didn't know what we were talking about. I didn't know we were going to do this today. And those are all recipes because you didn't follow through. You didn't ask people what they needed, and you didn't really know what was necessary. And that's why it always falls apart that way. It has to be planned. It has to be collaborative, and people have to know what's going on. And every time I've seen a horror story, it always falls into those categories. Someone didn't do one of those things or multiple things.
So, planning, preparation, and communication. Sounds like
Correct.
those were the three pieces.
Yeah, and awareness of the climate in your building. Know what's going on because you may think you know it, but unless you're really involved closely with it, you totally can miss the mark.
Right. So, being in touch with your staff, that sounds like an important piece of it as well.
Right.
So, the last question is, what is your mission or vision as a special ed director?
My mission and vision is really to have. It goes back to even when I started teaching. It goes back to having special ed not be this section of a room, or to have it as something that you can say, oh, you're identifying the particular students as different than others. It's something that's so blended, and the needs are not just go to all special ed, because there's kids who are regular ed that can use some of the special ed things that are done, some of the differentiated instruction. I think it really comes down to like real clear understanding of not making it a division, but making it collaborative for all. Because when we all are working together, we're all going to build something much stronger, and that's really what it is. And making our students less disabled, and that's the kind of thing we make them more disabled sometimes by the things that we put into an IEP.
Yes.
And what we don't make it so there's that vision. I really push that in my schools. It's like I want to see that continuum of when kids are being ready for post-secondary, whether they're going out to work or they're going to college, that there's been a plan from the moment they walked in ninth grade to the moment they graduate, that there's a plan, and it's either you're going to develop to have the right skills to go out to work, or you're going to have the right skills to help you be successful in college. If I overload and give you too much and you're too dependent on what the teachers give you, you're not going to be a success. So we want to be, that's the whole piece there. It's like, let's make it as even as possible, level that playing field.
So, what I'm hearing you say is you're really interested in having that community and that integration of the special education class with everybody else, and also to be really looking at their independence as they get older and all the way along the way.
Exactly. When you get into college, there's no one's going to say they're going to give you all the accommodations that you're getting in that IEP, and a lot of them are loaded. So it's you have to make the child be able to stand on their own. They have to be able to be independent, thoughtful thinkers, and be able to understand their disability, their needs, and be able to find the right instruments and structures to help them be successful.
That's great. Um, Awesome. Last but not least, I'd like to give Claudia, our sensory enrichment expert, a little bit of time for a quick training to end our podcast. Claudia?
Yeah. How many minutes do you give me?
Well, we were saying we were shooting for maybe 12:45. 10 minutes?
Oh, that's
5 minutes?
plenty.
Somewhere in there?
Okay. Yes. So, to talk briefly about what I do, my field of expertise is the brain, neuroscience, and more specifically, the capacity that the brain has to change is called neurogenesis. And so, for the past many decades, I have been trying to make sense of the fact that we know so much about what we can do to help the human brain, our children in particular, feel less anxious, learn more easily, but also the teachers have less of a burden because the kids are anxious and because it's difficult to teach them. And you did mention it was a different crowd after the pandemic that came into the doors of the school. So, what we know in neuroscience is that there are all kinds of explanations for what children do or what they cannot do, but we look at it from the brain perspective. Why is a child anxious? Because sounds make him terrified, because it's difficult to stay seated, because they are not motivated, because they are not interested. And all of that can be discovered at the location inside the brain, and with these neuromediators, the messengers between the brain cells. Some of them have names that most people know, like serotonin and dopamine. Those are magical hormones in the brain. Serotonin makes us learn, helps us feel relaxed and pay attention. Dopamine is motivation, is also control of movement. A lot of children unfortunately have what we would call an erratic function of dopamine that makes them unable to stay seated. It's a physiological issue, and most tricks or tries to make them by discipline doesn't work, and in fact it creates more anxiety. So knowing all what we know from the research, what I did was create exercises from the research that could be adapted to people. And they worked. Not surprisingly, because today there are about 70,000 articles that demonstrate that environmental enrichment is helpful to the brain. So we have been able to talk with teachers and parents and say, like you were asked a minute ago, Anthony, what is the biggest problem? And what I have heard is the difficulty for the kids to pay attention. They are in the classroom to learn, but if they can do something else, they will. So finding small things that don't need training, that don't cost money, that can help the teacher do her role and her mission accomplish, and the children enjoy it. Was that possible? And we discovered it was. So one of the things I can teach you, in case you did not know that, dopamine, this wonderful thing that helps us stay focused, have good memory, be motivated, and be in control of our movement, we can increase it easily, very easily. And it doesn't take medication, and it doesn't take special equipment. It takes basically a scent. So I'm using an essential oil. It doesn't need to be an essential oil, but what scientists have discovered is that when we smell something that we enjoy, my favorite is orange, so I love to smell the scent of orange. Our brain is going to release 100% more dopamine That's an enormous amount. And you can see the difference in children and in the teacher, I would say, when you have 100% more dopamine release. And it's a natural process, so there is no side effect. It's possible also to help the children have a better serotonin function. And I was mentioning being able to relax, being able to pay attention and learn. I have worked with quite a lot of children with Down syndrome who have a reputation to have difficulty learning. But once we were able to help them, at least on the biochemistry level, helping their brain produce more of that dopamine and serotonin, because nature made us so that we can produce more by using our senses in a natural way. Like when we talk about sensory stimulation on our end at Mendability, it's about smelling something that smells really nice, giving a back rub to someone. And if we had the opportunity, we would share that with you physically, and we would have you understand and feel what happens to your entire body when someone is doing a soft back rub. You could even try yourself with a pen and sort of not write on your new shirt, but maybe simply draw lines and get a chill. And that chill is a demonstration that your brain is producing more or releasing more serotonin. So those very simplistic things that can be brought to the teacher, brought to the parents. We work a lot with parents of children who have all kinds of special needs and also adults. And they need something simple. And a lot of teachers have hand lotions, and there is somewhere in the school something that smells good. And hand lotion is convenient because it's very safe. So either the teacher can put a little bit of lotion to her hand, and we call it the claw because we use our fingertips to randomly do circle whatever on the back of the kid. We invite the kid to smell. Most children with special needs do not have a sniff response, which doesn't matter because they are breathing and the molecules go into the olfactory bulbs and go to the amygdala, all those wonderful places inside the brain, and have an instant change.
Yeah, and in my special education classroom, they did smell and gentle claw, which is the one Cloudy's talking about, where all the kids had a cotton ball and they would smell and they'd turn on some gentle music, some classical music, and dim the lights. And then the teachers would go around and just gently stroke the child's back kind of with their fingernails. And the kids would all lean forward waiting for that to come. It was like, my teacher just loved it. She's like, oh my gosh, Christine, you should come in here when it's happening because they're smelling and they're leaning forward, immediately waiting for that touch. And then it just calms them down and gets them ready for learning. So at the end of our podcast, I just want to thank everybody for being here, Anthony and Claudia, even though we can't see you, Anthony. We know you're here and appreciate your input. And spending time on the show and sharing your stories with us and tips and experiences with our audience. So thank you again for being here, and we really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. And thank you, Claudia, for sharing yours. That was very interesting as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yep, you too. Thank you again.